I thought I should personally give you the outcome of my knee replacement surgery. Well, I didn't survive it. Unfortunately, I'm speaking to you now from the other side. Worst of all, sadly, there was no bright light at the end. And the place I landed is a lot hotter than I had hoped. So that's it. I guess I'll see you. Wait, I hope I don't see you here. Okay, just kidding, of course. Hello. Surgery is over. It was successful. I'm fine. It is Friday. And so that you know I'm really alive, this is today's paper. You know, the Cardinals took the game from the Parish last night. So this is like they do in the movies, right? I really did make it. Anyway, at least I made some of the medical staff laugh. When we were getting ready, I said, hey, while I'm under anesthesia, do you think you could do brain augmentation surgery? They looked up for a second, and I said, you'd have to be able to build on a vacuum anyway. I'm currently hiding away for a little bit to recuperate. And to my siblings, no, I am not in the witless protection program. Anyway, this stage is not fun, as anybody who's had this knows, but it's not awful. And I just feel so blessed by such great medical care and so many good people. For this weekend, we do have a homily which I pre-recorded 6 years ago when we had the same readings. I think it's still kind of timely. You'll note that the quality of our recording is so much better now. And two of the examples, like the soccer players that were rescued from that cave in Thailand, those aren't exactly timely, but it still makes the point. I hope you find some blessing in it. Anyway, just thanks for the prayers and encouragement. Know that I'm praying for you, and I am just really blessed that you are a part of my life. When he was president, George H. Bush had a funny moment at a nursing home. Now, it was one of those kind of photo op opportunities where they'd get pictures of the president greeting various people, and he was a good sport about this. He went up to a woman in the hallway in a wheelchair, bent over, shook her hand and said, "Do you know who I am?" The woman looked up and said, "No, but if you ask at the nurse's station, I'll bet they could help you." For us, life's like that sometimes, huh? For God, I think God's like that most of the time. It seems that almost always God's presence goes unnamed, God's work goes unnoticed as the work of God. It was striking in today's gospel that the people didn't recognize Jesus for who he was. And why didn't they? Because he was just too ordinary, is what they say, right? Hey, isn't this the carpenter's son? I mean, didn't my kid play soccer or whatever with him? Weren't his mother and I in the same carpool? I mean, didn't we have him over for dinner? They could not see him as the Son of God because he was just too ordinary. And sadly, that's often true for us as well. We just really haven't learned to see how God is alive in this world. And for me, one of the greatest gifts of the Catholic tradition is how it teaches us to see with what have been called sacramental eyes. To learn to see how holiness is most often found in the ordinary, not in the spectacular. That God works through people who are real and imperfect. That God shows up in the ordinary, regular moments of our daily lives. Now, St. Paul wants us to see that this is true today. He spends a chunk of time telling us how weak and sinful and ordinary he is. He kind of even boasts about it. And why? Because he doesn't want us to think it has anything to do with him. He wants people to see that it is God through him. And if God can use me, Paul, as weak as I am, that tells you how great God is, right? And it's no less God, because that's just how God does it. Now, perhaps that's especially clear in the tough times, right? There's a wonderful movie out now, which I recommend, called Won't You Be My Neighbor? It's kind of a little documentary on the life of Mr. Fred Rogers. The movie includes an interview clip with Mr. Rogers after the awful attacks on 9/11. And he said, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.'" That's great wisdom. In the crises, look for the helpers. You see, God doesn't cause harm, and God can't stop all harm. But when it visits us, God is alive and active through us and other ordinary people like us. God's there. Just look at the people who jump in to help. A current example, of course, is that soccer team trapped in the cave in Thailand. Could you imagine if you were the mom or dad who got news that your kid was one of those trapped there? How earnestly you would have been praying. You've been, oh God, we need a miracle. We need something, right? The fact that those kids were found is miraculous, isn't it? And it would not have happened except for the ordinary people who were willing to use their training and their talent to jump in to do what they could do. My goodness. They've been, this morning, if you've probably heard, they've been doing buddy dives, and before Mass started, they already had 4 of the kids out. They're going to think it'll take a good number of hours. They hope to get a few more out. One rescuer volunteer has already lost his life doing so. But when I think of the prayers of those kids' parents, how did God answer them? Through these wonderful people who were willing to jump in and to help. And that's how God almost always does it, right? And how about you? At the beginning of Mass, I asked, could you ever think of yourself as the answer to somebody else's prayer? Did it ever dawn on you? Well, yes. Who else does God use? You might be, like me, like St. Paul, all your weaknesses, the one that God uses to reach out to somebody who needs comfort or help or rescue or whatever. Yes, we're imperfect, but that doesn't seem to bother God. It never has. It doesn't now. Closer to home, this week, on Monday, we had a heartbreaking funeral for a 2-month-old named Reed Dumpy Wolf who died. The death of that child was not God's idea. Death and suffering are never God's idea. In spite of the ridiculous cliches we say without thinking, even everything happens for a reason. If you mean by that God can bring something good out of it, I'm with you. But if you mean that God somehow caused it, no. Our first reading last Sunday said clearly, God does not make death. That's the word of God. Don't forget that. God does not cause it. But when heartache visits us, God is there. God was there Monday. I saw God with these eyes. I saw God in the way that family members and friends in this community surrounded a heartbroken mom and dad with such great love. In the midst of unbearable heartache, there is also great beauty and goodness. That's how it's been in my life, yours as well, right? I think, if you think of how was God there for you, was it not through ordinary people? Maybe a parent or other family member, maybe a teacher who was kind, or an imperfect priest, or maybe even the goodness of a stranger. The thing is, and hear me if you can, none of that makes it any less God. The fact that it's God working through ordinary people doesn't make it any less God. It's just how humble God is, right? And we just don't usually recognize it. So I thought about that little visit at the nursing home and thought, had it been Jesus instead of the president who was not recognized, I don't think that would have bothered Jesus in the least. I bet he would have laughed, because actually I think he's used to it. It happens to him all the time. God is indeed alive and active in this world, just in ways more ordinary than we expect, or that we often look for. God doesn't need the credit, right? God just wants the good to happen. May we more and more learn to recognize God in our regular daily living, for whether or not we recognize it, God is indeed alive and active in this world.